Hi, I'm Tom Henriksen from the DevOps Online Summit. Today, I'm joined by Leo Murillo, a cloud native technologies expert and co-chair of the GitOps working group. Leo, introduce yourself to the people here at the DevOps Online Summit.
All right. Thank you for having me, Tom. It's really great to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. As Tom mentioned, my name is Leonardo Murillo. Everybody calls me Leo. I'm principal partner solutions architect for Weaveworks, which, by the way, is known for being the company that coined the term GitOps. I'm also a co-chair of the GitOps working group and maintainer of the Open GitOps project. I'm a CNCF speaker and community organizer, and you'll see me talking and find me all over the place. So I hope you look me up and we can connect and chat.
Yeah, you're a busy guy, Leo, and I know, like you mentioned, I will link you up LinkedIn on the show notes so people can get in touch with you. But you're speaking in a lot of different places on this topic, aren't you?
I'm all over the place. I speak for AWS. I speak for the CNCF, for Weaveworks, of course, and I run the local Costa Rica community chapter for the CNCF. Mm-hmm. So you'll find me there as well. I'm a speaker.
How do you find all the time to do all that, Leo? That's the question I think everybody wants to know.
And well, I never have enough time. That's one thing that I have not figured out. Time is always a big question, but I manage somehow.
Yes, you're a busy guy. So, Leo, we appreciate you joining us today. You want to talk to us about GitOps. So, just to kind of start us off, tell us, what is GitOps and how would you define that?
All right. So, and what's interesting is that very question is what the Open GitOps project and the GitOps working group is set to answer, right? Because that's an evolving subject. GitOps is an operating model for cloud native applications. And what GitOps looks to accomplish is to provide a consolidated way to operate and deploy both infrastructure as well as applications that are cloud native using a consistent lifecycle, consistent tooling, and consistent operating model. And it's driven by 4 principles. Now, bear in mind that those principles are evolving. We actually have a principles committee in the Open GitOps project that meets a week, and we are iterating to make sure that the definition of these 4 principles is really aligned to what the end users and what the community actually wants GitOps to be, right? Because we really want to kind of go away from that. Some issues that we've seen, for example, in the DevOps community, right? Where DevOps was this complex term that everybody had a little bit of a nuance in its understanding. So we really want to land on a kind of like community reconciled version of what it is, right? But again, operating model based on 4 principles. The first principle is that everything, that your entire system is going to be declared in code. It's declarative, which is basically fundamental from imperative. You're declaring your desired state. Second principle is that desired state is versioned and immutable. In other words, for you to change your desired state, you introduce a new version. You never change a previous version. You don't mutate. Immutability and versioning. The third principle is that desired state is continually reconciled automatically by software agents. It eliminates the human component. The reconciling, the synchronizing of your runtime state with your desired state happens automatically by agent. And the fourth principle is kind of a self-recursive principle, which means that this is the only way by which you interact with the system. In other words, of course, in the context of usual operations, there is this big conversation as to, well, what happens in kind of like incidents and that type of the notes and kind of caveats to these 4 principles. But the only way for you to interact with the system is through this desired state, which is in a state real that is immutable, and it gets automatically reconciled by agents. That is GitOps.
Yeah, that's an interesting definition. I guess as you were going through that, Leo, I was thinking, so I'm just to kind of give you some context, I'm kind of an old Java guy, and I remember talking and learning about strings being immutable and how important that is. And using this in the GitOps frame, I can see where that's very important, where, you need to have everything, as you mentioned, version correctly and have all that stuff together, because working in our complex environment, sometimes, it's like we're juggling and there's things kind of just fall on the ground. You don't want to lose any spare parts or anything in your work, correct?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in this concept. For example, if you think about immutability and versioning, that gives you some instant benefits. First of all, you have very predictable mechanisms to roll back. For example, if you need to move back and forth in time of your desired state, you have versions that allow that to happen. And you know that each version and this is interesting because when you think about, for example, Docker and Docker images, the Docker images are immutable. And the continuity, which kind of, if you look back, kind of like configuration management times, you were looking for this idempotency, right? And you evolve from that concept of always reaching a consistent state in guaranteeing that the packaging and the manifestation of that state can never, right? So you have this consistent view at a point in time of what your infrastructure and your applications, your workloads running on that infrastructure look like. So it's very valuable in terms of kind of like being able to roll back, to deploy progressively across different stages, right? Because you know exactly what a stage is operating. And if you use Git, so what's saying is GitOps is really not necessarily about Git, right? It was born out of the use of Git as a version control system. Principles that I've mentioned apply not just with Git. You can reach the same, I guess, model with other platforms. But the whole idea is that you have auditability as well. You have a trail. You know exactly when something happened, who, and how each sequence of actions has reached your current desired state, right, over time. I think those are some of the really big benefits that an operating model where you have this concepts of mutability, version, etc., at the core, and Git, of course, if configured properly, gives you.
Yeah, it really gives us a lot of benefits, and I can see why a lot of companies and organizations would look to use GitOps. So to kind of come back to that, where we have these benefits that you talked about, Leo. What about a company wants to get started with GitOps? Where do we start? Because that seems like a big topic, but you probably have some good recommendations for how to start.
I think the best. And this is a common denominator to starting up when we talk about starting up a lot of things. Like people talk to me about where do we start with CI/CD? Where do we start with DevOps? Where do we start with? How do we start, right? I'm very much a proponent of starting small. I don't think, and this is, I guess, also a relevant component to mention, right? GitOps is an operating model that works for infrastructure and it works for applications and workloads on that infrastructure. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it all at once, right? You can start small. You can maybe do traditional CI/CD, or as some people call it, ClickOps types of kind of like operating models for certain components of your infrastructure. But you might start with certain workloads, right? Let's imagine you already have, and this also very much depends on the composition and type of organization that you're. If you look at kind of like a small startup with a cloud native greenfield application that wants to start doing GitOps, you get a very, very different scenario as if you're an enterprise that has a lot of legacy and that has a huge range of maturity levels in terms of cloud native adoption, right?
Yeah.
So I would say start, look for a workload. I would likely start at an application. Like I would probably start with the application, deploying a workload on. It's easier if you start on Kubernetes. If you already have something running on Kubernetes, you already are a good way there.
Yeah.
If you're already using Helm, or if you're already using Customize, or if you're already declaring your applications and your workloads in some Kubernetes native mechanism, you're already a good way there. So pick one workload that is closest to this scenario. Pick a GitOps operator. There's multiple choices
Yeah.
to pick from. There's Flux that is built by Weaveworks. There's Argo CD, which is built by Intuit, and there's new smaller projects coming out that are looking to implement this operator. Pick the one that works best for you, and usually start. Like, you probably will not start, and this is a good advice generally. Do not start trying to hit production all the way to begin with, right? Become familiar with how it works in pre-production environments. And once you start to learn all the benefit and how you feel, now that you feel comfortable with the mechanism, with the model, then yes, get it to production. And that will give you a lot of material, a lot of learning opportunity, so that the next workload and then to the infrastructure itself becomes, you know what I'm saying?
Makes sense, Leo. That's some good advice there. As we talk about, people starting to use it, what are some of the pitfalls that we might run into using GitOps?
I think there is likely going to be I'm not going to say challenge, but one of the areas where there's some process that will have to take place to get it right is the decoupling of the deployment component from existing CI/CD pipelines. Because one of the things that GitOps is really good at is creating this boundary, this wall between integration and deployment. Integration is now the usual integration as we know. You have your Jenkins or your Tekton or your Jenkins or GitLab runners or GitHub Actions or whatever else you're using to orchestrate your workflows. And the integration part of it, which is doing the unit testing and the testing and the linting and all these processes, are written up in some pipeline.
Yeah.
So those pipelines end up with a deployment step at the end, which is usually externally reaching, right? You do a kube control apply, or you do a Terraform apply, or you do something to reach out and apply change. So you're going to have to take those pipelines and split them up clearly so that integration is happening in an integration pipeline, and the deployment happens from the point in time in which a new state has introduced in the repo. So I think that's one area where there's some work that needs to happen. For that to happen, there's also need to kind of like sometimes repositories or how you're using Git, and whether you're using branches or whether you're using tags, you might have to tweak a little bit how you structure that so that it can effectively be synchronized against one or more repositories or stages, right? Because now you're tracking Git references. You're no longer having this imperative mode of just deploying something on demand. You're reconciling all the time. And I think that's kind of like challenges or things to do when you're getting started. I think there's also a next level of challenges to overcome, which is when you get to GitOps at scale, right? You will start with one workload and you will start with one environment, but then you will have many workloads and you'll have many environments, and now you'll need to orchestrate deployment of workloads across multiple clusters. And we see a pattern where organizations are going from one to many clusters as more and more teams adopt Kubernetes. And we also see a trend for hybrid cloud, as well as the edge, kind of like now running on Kubernetes. So now you get cluster fleets. So reaching that state is a level of maturity where you're going to have to solve different problems, which are associated to now how do you manage effectively declarations that are modular and extensible, right? How do you automate the registration of new clusters in the cluster fleet with kind of like a source repo that is going to be reconciled? Those are challenges that are going to be experienced kind of like further along the maturity model. Matter of fact is Weaveworks recently released a GitOps maturity model that talks about kind of like these different stages of adoption, which is valuable because kind of like each one of those different stages exposes organizations and teams to a new kind of like set of problem space, to new problem space. So yeah, but I think the bigger, more likely candidates for become are those that I mentioned.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's, as we kind of grow in our journey, we experience new problem, or I guess new challenges, Leo. So that's interesting. So you've really shared a lot of good stuff here about GitOps, Leo. What are your closing thoughts?
I think I really have a true belief that GitOps is a phenomenal model for operating both infrastructure and workloads at scale, particularly effective with Kubernetes. I think I would encourage everybody to really look for the subtleties in the model that make it so powerful. Because I think there is sometimes still, because it's relatively early in its definition, concerns and hesitation as to how is this really different from infrastructure as code? How does this apply to DevOps? What does GitOps have DevOps? So I think it has tremendous potential. I think it is a very powerful model once you wrap your head around it. And I would really encourage people to participate in the definition of what it is, whether you are pro GitOps or not. We are working to define something that is very valuable and that has a lot of potential. So it is important for the end user community to be active drivers of what that means. So there is the Open GitOps project. You can find us on CNCF. There is the GitOps working group, which is an open initiative where anybody can participate and everybody's opinion is heard. So I really encourage people to join into the conversation and learn. It's rapidly evolving, as everything in the Kubernetes world nowadays is. So reach out also, like if you have ideas and you want to, I don't know, share, don't hesitate.
Excellent. Leo, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for listening.
Excellent. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. On behalf of Leo Murillo, I am Tom Hendrickson for the DevOps Online Summit.